Thank you, Christina.
Great.
Excellent.
Everybody acknowledged. Thank you. Excellent. Well, thank you again, everybody. This is week 3 of our 6 weeks. And so tonight we are finishing up with presentations about services. So we're very fortunate to have people representing parks, recreation, cultural and community services. So you'll hear a wide variety of services that are supported by our general fund, and a little bit from Public Works about things that aren't general fund supported, but they're going to focus on their general fund supported services, since that is the focus of our discussion. We'll finish talking about services with a very brief recap of the support services, which I don't want to underplay since I am a big part of support services. But you're probably more familiar about the stuff that keeps businesses going, but we'll just recap that. And then recognizing that that's a lot in one night, we still want to then review the revenue options and sort of lay the table for future conversations, because we have 3 more meetings where we'll be digging into the meat of the question in front of this committee. And that question is really focused around policy around the levy lid lift, which is one of our 10-year financial sustainability strategies, and the potential replacement of that. So without giving away the story, you may have already figured it out, is that we believe that it is necessary to ask voters if they're willing to support a levy lid lift. The questions that we would like this committee to ponder is some policy questions around that. And of course, if the committee disagrees with that, certainly they can make that recommendation to the city manager as she considers what she'll take to council. But tonight, we don't anticipate we'll be digging into discussion. It'll be, again, more information. If we can start getting your questions as we're going through that final presentation, particularly as we look at the issue paper that we presented to council already. And if you have questions around that, that will help us be more prepared for the discussion that we'll have in 2 weeks. So with that, I will turn it, well, actually, before we get started, I'd love to take the opportunity to introduce our speakers who are here with us tonight. And so first, I will start with Colleen Kelly, who is our Recreation, Cultural, and Community Services Director. And then with her is Bethany Wolbrook-Dunn, who is our Community Services Manager, and Mary Reedy, our Recreation and Cultural Services Supervisor. And then last but not least is Kirk Peterson, our Park Superintendent. And so together they will present all around our recreation, culture, parks, recreation, and cultural services topics. And then again, as Allegra mentioned, Public Works will be coming at the break, and we'll introduce them at that time. So Allegra, I'll turn it back to you if you have any other things you'd love to say.
Just to emphasize what I put in the chat, it's worked really well as the presentations have been going in our last meetings. A lot of you have put questions in the chat, and often staff have been able to answer them there. And if not, we come back to them at the Q&A. So feel free to do that. Also, if you have a question, the raise hand function works well as well. I'm not presenting, so I'm monitoring both of those things. And I'm happy to kind of insert myself when people have questions. So I guess I'll just give one last pause if anyone has a question before we hand it over to Parks for their presentation. All right, take it away.
Thank you, Allegra. Good evening, everyone. I'm Colleen Kelly. As Sarah said, I'm the director of a relatively new department called Recreation, Cultural, and Community Services. And I'll be talking with you about that a little bit more as part of the presentation. I think the next slide lists out all of our presenters, which have all been introduced to you already. So we can move on to the next, Bethany. So the Recreation, Cultural, and Community Services Department has been in existence for not quite 2 years. It was formed in August of 2020, I get all my dates mixed up, shortly after the pandemic was upon us. It came on the heels of the retirement of the previous Parks Department director. So we used to have a Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services department. And when that person was retiring, we were full in the throes of COVID. Much of our programming was shut down or reduced. The city manager was concerned about recruiting for a new department director under those conditions, and made the decision to reorganize our functional areas into a different configuration. At that time, I was the community services manager, and I was asked to become the interim director of this new department, which really got created as sort of a pilot. And we spent about 6 months assessing whether this was something that was going to be workable for the city. And eventually the reorganization was made permanent. So the implication of it was that the park operations function, which Kirk oversees, was moved into the administrative services department as part of what became Parks, Fleet, and Facilities. So we had a fleet and facilities division. It became Parks, Fleet, and Facilities under this reorganization. And the manager of that department, who Kirk reports to, of that division, who Kirk reports to, is really the point person for all things related to park operations, as well as all things related to fleet and facilities. So that's a new position as of 2020. And we have a recently brand new person in that position with the retirement of Dan Johnson, who had been in that role for some time. The other significant shift was to move community services, which had been a kind of a floating division reporting to the city manager's office, into this department. City manager saw a lot of nexus between a lot of the community services programming and the recreation and cultural services programming. And so that was really sort of the experiment of this, and the pilot of trying this out was to see if those things could fit together well. And the last point to make about this is that even as we are reorganized internally, we recognize that the community sees and hears and understands park and recreation go together, and they still do go together for us. And so what it means for our work is just a lot of communication and internal coordination across those functional areas that reside in different parts of the organization now. So I would say that's been a good challenge for us to rise to. And then the real benefit of having community services connected to the recreation and cultural services, we have seen manifest in a couple of ways that you'll hear through the presentation later tonight. Thanks, Bethany. So our work, and you probably have heard this from other presenters, is really driven by some significant policy and planning documents. Obviously, all of our work flows from the Shoreline Comprehensive Plan, but then specific to our functional areas, we are also governed by the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Master Plan, fondly referred to as the PROS Plan. And you can see that that plan is nearing the end of its last planning cycle, and we are in the process now of beginning the work to convene a team of folks that are going to be responsible for updating that plan by the end of 2023. We also have a public art plan that is currently in the process of being updated, and that plan is now going to be the public art and cultural services plan, so that we're really looking at our special event planning and how we're responding to our increasingly diverse community through our cultural events work as well. And then the urban forest strategic plan, Kirk will touch on this in his discussions of the work that he's responsible for. And comprehensive emergency management and climate action plans are policy documents that reside in the community services division. So those will be relevant to the work that Bethany talks about. A couple other significant developments since the last levy lid lift that are important contextual pieces for the committee. At the time of the last levy lid lift, this city had a pool. And the city had been knowing for some time that that pool was outdated. It was costing a fair amount of money to keep it running. So we were subsidizing the cost of the community having access to a pool for some time. And there was an effort to put together a bond measure that would have replaced that pool with a community aquatic and recreation center. And unfortunately, that bond did not pass. After the timing of that also is when COVID came, and the pool really was kind of abruptly had to stop operations as we figured out what COVID meant. And so now we were subsidizing the pool to an even greater extent without people being able to even access utilization of it. So in the end, the pool was closed about a year earlier than was initially anticipated. I believe it was March of 2020, because it shut down with COVID and it really never reopened after that. And so that was a policy decision that the council made at that time. Since then, the city did have a successful park bond measure that passed just this past February. Pretty scaled down version that's focused largely on the redevelopment of 5 parks, specific parks, and then some additional enhancements and amenities to 3 other park areas in the city. There's also $1 million for public art in that bond. So we're still excited about the development and work that we're going to be able to do with those resources going forward. And I think with that, I am turning it over to Kirk to talk with you about park operations and urban forestry.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you having me and letting me speak. So the things I would like to talk with you a little bit about tonight is what do we exactly maintain and how do we manage that? Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about our urban forestry program. The City of Shoreline's Park Operations Division manages all the urban forest in our parks, but also on the rest of the city's public land. So street trees, rights of way, open spaces are all things that we manage. And then I'd like to talk a little bit more about how our park system is growing and why we're looking to expand it where we can. So our park system, we're currently at about over 434 acres. We have a number of community parks, 34 of them. We have picnic shelters, restrooms, playgrounds, community gardens, off-leash parks, which are very popular. We have a couple of recreation centers, a number of athletic facilities, including baseball fields, soccer fields, tennis courts, and a lot of really active volunteers that help us maintain the city's parks. One of the things you'll notice, if we can go back to the other slide real quick, one of the things you'll notice on this slide, we're currently at about 7.5 acres per 1,000 residents for parkland. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's part of the reason why we would like to increase our parkland. And you also see on this slide, we do have a number of rental hours. We keep really busy in the parks, very active with athletics, picnic, sheltering, and a number of other activities that keep citizens very busy. So next slide, please. So when we look at our resources with parks, we divide them up into various active recreational activities and then areas of the parks that are more passive recreation. So athletic fields are obviously very active. Parking lots, restrooms, things that go in the parking, the use of the parks. We have a lot of utilities and substructures throughout the park system. Landscaping is a big part of what we do at about 30%. Our urban forestry program takes up about 10% of our staff time. And then capital construction, we're always trying to maintain the parks. You also see in the subset here, we do have a citizen satisfaction survey. And we respond pretty well when it comes to maintenance. Overall, most citizens are satisfied or very pleased with the work we do. Next slide, please. So in our urban forestry program, next slide, here's some volunteers, but we'll look at the next slide. So there's a lot of development going on in Shoreline, as you're all very well aware of. And we do try to manage our urban forest so we don't lose a lot of tree canopy. And we work really hard for that. And one of our guiding documents is our urban forestry strategic plan. And basically what it looks at, it's a companion guide to our 20-year planting plan, our climate action plan, some of our environmental sustainability strategies, and other guiding documents we have. But overall, what we're looking to do with our plan is to restore a lot of our riparian areas along stream corridors within the park system and throughout the city, but also create healthy forests, but also increase tree canopy overall, to try to keep our city and our urban forest healthy. Next slide, please. We do have a number of partners. We work with the Tree City Foundation with the National Arbor Day group, and we are Tree City USA. We are part of the Green Cities Partnership, which is a large regional coalition made up of a number of municipalities and counties within the Tri-County area. So Pierce County, Snohomish County, and obviously King County. And it's a large environmental effort to coordinate a lot of our environmental improvements, the increase of tree canopy, planting native plant materials, removing invasive species, and then restoring riparian areas, particularly in stream corridors and throughout watersheds. So we do have a number of park additions, and when I came to the city 23 years ago, we had 22 parks and about 200 acres of land, and we've more than doubled it and since the city's time, and we'd like to continue to do so. So the question comes back to, why do we need more parks? Part of that is we would like to meet the National Recreation and Park Association standards. We're currently at about, like I was saying in the slide, about 8 acres per 1,000 residents. We'd like to get that up to about 10 or even more to meet some of those national standards. It does create healthy communities. We would like every resident to be able to walk to a park or a neighborhood park, but also enjoy some of the larger regional parks like Richmond Beach Saltwater Park, Hamlin Park, and Boeing Creek and Shoreview Park. And this is really important, as we all know, with light or with sound transit. A lot of these zoning and densities have increased quite a bit. And in those corridors, we would like it where people within all of our community, within our diverse community, were able to walk to a park. So we're always looking to add parkland where we can and expose people to nature and just have an opportunity to get outside and enjoy their community and their parks. One of the new parks that we added was Westminster Park. It's about half an acre, and it's not too far from Westminster and between Aurora. It's small in the neighborhood. And I believe it's, if you take a left on 150th off of Westminster, you'll run right into the park. And it was a former house that was in pretty sad shape and was going to need demolished, but we were able to purchase that land, clear the house, and create a nice open space for the neighborhood there. We haven't completely developed the park, but it's one of those type of little neighborhood parks people will be able to walk to. Children will be able to play in the forest, and the community can gather there, and it'll increase our tree canopy and be good from an environmental standpoint too. Next slide, please. Edwin T. Pratt Memorial Park. So this was a new park. It's about 3/4 of an acre. And it's right off 185th and Ashworth. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the 7-Eleven at 185th and Ashworth. So right across the street is the Edwin T. Pratt Memorial Park. It's one of those kind of land banks. It's nice and level. It's kind of a blank slate from what we can do with it from a park standpoint. But it is in that zone where there's some high density. And we might be able to develop this to make it a really nice little community park that everyone can enjoy. Next, please. So Rotary Park. I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with this. This is near the mower shop at 10th and 185th. And in the highlighted areas, the yellow, you can see are areas that we're either purchasing or in the process of purchasing. And that will add to the park. There's a little Rotary Park. And then there's also the Seattle City Light transmission corridor and property there that you can see in kind of the red hash mark. So we would like to develop that into a park. This again is in that higher density zone near the Sound Transit park and rides. So this will make a really good park in that respect. And Paramount Open Space. This is another little gem that's in our park system. It's a nice park, but we're nibbling away and adding more open space by buying some properties there. And that will add to the park, and we'll be able to remove some of the houses and plant a lot of native trees in the understory to increase the habitat there. So another good pickup for the park system. And then in the emerging needs, obviously the bond passed, so we're really excited about that. But like anything, as we do add park property and land, we will need to maintain it to a standard. So we are looking to eventually add an additional FTE beginning in 2024. And after we complete the construction, we add new restrooms and landscaping and utilities. And a lot of the improvements we're going to make, playgrounds, pathways, irrigation systems, all those things, we will need another additional staff person. So after the construction's finished and we complete the parks, we'll need to add another person in 2027. And then along with those, we'll need an increase for utilities and janitorial expenses, particularly if we're adding a spray park, adding irrigation, and as we add restrooms, which is really important to people. We will need some extra janitorial services to maintain our park system. And I think with that, I'm going to turn that over to Mary Reedy, our recreation superintendent.
Hi, thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to share what we do in recreation and cultural services. So recreation services, we have quite an array of recreation services. General recreation, which includes adult programming, active adult programming, which both out in the community as well as at Spartan Recreation Center. We have preschool and youth programming, youth day camps, you can read it all there, drop-in programs, trips, shoreline walks, gardens, and scholarships. I'm going to talk real briefly about each of those. So the adult programs, Bethany, can you go back? So general recreation, nope. Thank you. So like I said, adult programs, we have an aging adult strategy that we developed in 2018 that we work with the Shoreline Senior Center on as well. And so we do allow the Senior Center to have space at Spartan Recreation Center to offer active adult programming. We too offer active adult programming throughout the day and evenings. We have drop-in programs at Spartan Recreation Center as well for both our classes as well as the weight room and gym. Preschool and youth programs are huge demand, and those are out in the community at all the different parks. You'll see different outdoor preschool if you go to Hamlin during the week, and sports camps and things like that, as well as at Spartan Recreation Center. Our day camps are enormous. Fill usually within the first couple hours. If any of you have small children, you know that, and are looking for day camp opportunities within the city of Shoreline. Very high demand. We can't keep up, both from facility as well as staffing and budgetary constraints. Drop-in programs, I referenced that. Active adult trips, another program that has extensive wait lists and is in high demand, and we continue to try and grow it within our capacity to do so. Adults, baby boomers are retiring and they want to get out and do things, but not necessarily drive and coordinate it all themselves. So those are very, very popular. Shoreline walks, we found also, we started that one of our first programs to start back up during the pandemic because people were outside, could be masked and socially distanced. It's a volunteer-led walk program. So we train our volunteer leaders to lead different walks. We partner with the Shoreline Historical Museum, Shore Lake Arts, and other community organizations, as well as our own public art coordinator, to do informative walks throughout the community. We've partnered with some of Kirk's team to do arborist informed walks in the community as well, very popular. We have 2 community gardens, Twin Ponds and Sunset, with giving gardens at Twin Ponds. In our specialized recreation program, I'll talk about the partnership we have that's wonderful between our specialized recreation program and the giving gardens. Again, wait lists, significant wait lists for the community gardens, and our team manages the leasing of the plots, supporting the volunteers there, and coordinating the work that Kirk's team does in supporting the actual physical community gardens and the interface with our actual gardeners. We also have a scholarship program that supports a certain dollar amount each year for qualifying youth as well as adults with disabilities. We do try to supplement this with grants whenever possible. And so we currently have a grant for the summer that we received through Washington Recreation and Parks Association that is allowing 12 campers each week at our outdoor camp to come for free. And it's a wonderful opportunity. And we're working with the family advocates, the schools, to fill those spots with kids that really would have nothing else to do and would be getting outside. Next slide. Our Youth and Teen Development Program is another service area that is really, really busy right now. We have Hang Time, which is a program, a partner program that started with 21st Century Community Learning Center money through Clinton. And a long time ago, we have extended that money as far as we could. We continued the partnerships between the YMCA, the school district, City of Lake Forest Park, and City of Shoreline to support a currently 3-day-a-week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, after-school program for free for middle schoolers at both Kellogg and Einstein. Middle school, and the school district provides bus transportation as well as security staffing and administrative staff that stay late on those days. And the YMCA and city supply staff, program staff. And the city is the lead agency for both those sites. And so we do a lot of the administrative stuff, the registration and that type of thing. 6th graders are now part of middle school. We have close to 50% participation and over 50% enrollment of Hang Time are 6th graders currently this year. And that is because we don't have any middle schoolers that ever went to Hang Time because they weren't in middle school prior to the pandemic. So it's all new to everybody. The 6th graders are embracing it. They're used to having after school programs, staying at school after school, being in a safe, structured environment since they came from an elementary school experience, went to remote learning, and then came back. So we are finding unprecedented numbers at Hang Time. That's very exciting and pushing our staffing constraints for sure. The partnerships I'll talk about as we go through. We have teen camps, very popular as well, and trips. Those are the only fee-based programs we have in our Youth and Teen Development Program. We have the Shoreline Teen Center, which during the school year is open 6 days a week after school, and then in the evenings on Friday and Saturday nights for free for drop-in for any secondary school age student in it doesn't need to be in the district. We don't ask for verification that they're in school. We want them to all feel welcome and offer them a safe place to be and to engage with each other. We have special events through the Youth and Teen Development Program all throughout the year. You can see one of the break battles. We were known for many years as being one of the 2 places in Seattle that hosted the best break dancers in the Puget Sound region. And one of our crews, Massive Monkeys, went on to become nationally and internationally recognized through different national television shows and competitions and stuff. So very exciting. We have youth outreach leaders, which is a grant funded position through Best Starts for Kids, a King County levy, as well as the mental health therapist. So those are both funded through Best Starts for Kids, King County levy. The youth outreach leaders are high schoolers at Shorewood and Shorecrest, and their task is to work with other teens, connecting them to services in the community and to each other and to our programs. So really being there, learning about all the services in the community, and then working to connect them. They create a lot of the special events so that they can expose people to other services that are out there. It's been great. We had them this past year working in hang time and working with the middle schoolers. And so they got to mentor middle schoolers, get to know them, and also expose them to a lot of different services out there. The mental health therapist is also a fully funded position, fully accessed. So the key to this position is that we partner with Center for Human Services. There is no requirement, there's no paperwork, there's no anything that's required to come see the mental health therapist. That is based both out of the Shoreline Teen Center and also operates at Ballinger Homes. We have a program once a week at Ballinger Homes Community, which is the King County Housing Authority apartment complex in Shoreline. And we have run a teen program there for years. And so the mental health therapist goes there once a week as well. And we have a youth resource navigator that we get through grant funding that comes from the county through the Rotary Club, who contracts with Youth Care, for a youth resource navigator to be at our teen center to help youth and teens that are struggling with housing resource, food resource, transportation resource. Those are the three biggies. And we do have quite a few teens in Shoreline that struggle with those. And so this person is assigned to be at the teen center multiple days a week to connect them with the services and supports they need. We have a robust specialized recreation program. Spec Rec is, Shoreline has a history of a very large population of adults with disabilities due to Furcrest having been in the Shoreline community for so long. And so a lot of group homes grew up in this area. So we have a lot of adults with disabilities that live in group homes in Shoreline. And we have had since King County days, a very, very strong and regionally recognized specialized recreation program. We have a day program 4 days a week for adults with disabilities. We have virtual and in-person classes. Now, due to COVID, we learned how to do the virtual, which has been great for access for a lot of our medically fragile participants. The greenhouse was a grant-funded and private donation greenhouse over at Richmond Highlands Recreation Center, and our master gardeners in our community volunteer their time to work with these participants to grow all the starts for the Giving Garden. And so there's a really nice connection there. And they do events and trips. And so our team also manages all the indoor rentals at Spartan Recreation Center and Richmond Highlands Recreation Center, which are now coming back online, which is way too late for the community's liking. They've been banging on our door for a while to get back in our buildings to use our gyms and rooms. So how do we decide what we're going to do? We have a lot of tools we use. We send out a survey to all our registered participants quarterly, and we ask them a variety of questions. Some of you may have received those if you were a registered participant. We, as Colleen spoke to, we have the PROS plan, and within that PROS plan, there's 11 strategic action initiatives that we align our work with as best possible. We have our current public art plan that we are now going to kind of integrate our cultural services that our whole division works on as well. So it'll be a public art and cultural services plan. And then we have our recreation program plan, which is part of CAPRA, which we haven't mentioned yet, but it's a certification of accreditation for parks and recreation agencies. And it was a heavy lift and it's a national accreditation through National Recreation and Parks Association. And we received this in 2019. Very exciting. It was a lot of work, but wonderful. And so we were one of a handful of cities at that time that received this in Washington State. So with that, we started doing annual program evaluations and a program determinants evaluation. So that helps us determine what we should and shouldn't be doing. If somebody walks into Spartan, which we have on a regular basis, saying, I want Tiddlywinks Club, start it. And then we would be able to determine if that's really something we should be offering for the community. So this is the determinants evaluation tool that we use. And as you can see, we check off, does it align with the CAPRA standards that are part of a empirically based tool of what we should be doing in recreation? Does it align with our mission and vision statements, our strategic action initiatives, our division and department clarity map goals? Does it align with the cost recovery, which is the next slide I'll talk to you? We have the staff available, all those questions we fill out, and what type of budget resources needed and impact is needed. And then staff come up with a recommendation and we discuss. And we do have a adopted cost recovery strategy, and this is it. We use a tool, a cost recovery worksheet that enters all the different costs associated with a program and make sure that we are setting our fees so that they align with this adopted strategy. So you can see different programs depending on the community benefit being mostly individual, which would be rentals, and when we had the pool, it was diving lessons, as opposed to swim lessons, which were much different. They were in a very lower cost recovery because we saw the community benefit so much higher for getting our community and our kids to learn how to swim. Public art and cultural services is also part of our team, and public art is staffed by a current half-time public art coordinator. This has evolved since we started our public art program with the city of Shoreline, which was a temporary position and mainly program-based and putting on events and piano time. Some of you may remember the pianos and a lot of events, and it's moved to really doing sculptures, permanent pieces, permanent art installations, temporary arts installations in our parks. And the biggest change recently is integrating with our capital projects and making sure that we seize the opportunities to integrate art into capital projects as we build up and as the city builds so fast. So that has really been a big shift for this staff person's time. And we also have started 2 years ago, we're going into our 3rd year. The artist is starting on Monday, the artist in residency program at Richmond Beach Saltwater Park Cottage. And special events, as Colleen talked about, has really changed. And this is why we really wanted to change the public art plan to be public art and cultural services. We were seeing that the integration and the overlap was so strong. And during COVID, when we had to shut everything down and we couldn't put on events, and we got internally a team together of folks that really worked on events in very different ways. The neighborhood associations, the SUNY, who's our diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator, public art, special events, some of my program staff, and they all worked really closely together to see what we could do. And in that time of like, oh my gosh, we can't do anything, they realized what we could do. And that's where we came up with, and that was the catalyst for our Juneteenth celebrations that are now a part of our annual community celebrations, Pride celebrations, a lantern festival that happened in partnership with Shore Lake Arts this past February that celebrated Chinese New Year, porch light parade that we did with Kenmore, Bothell, Lake Forest Park, and ourselves. So 4 municipalities that just won an award for Washington Recreation Parks Association. And so you can see we do a lot of different special events, some which we own, a lot which we partner with, though, both internally with other departments as well as other organizations. And you can see we do have partnerships for our events and cultural services, the Shore Lake Arts Museum, Crookerburg, the library system. We work very closely with KCLS, Shoreline Farmers Market, and the Senior Center. So COVID impacts on recreation and cultural services was, as Colleen said, everything kind of came to a screeching halt when we were all in our homes and not sure how to move amongst each other. And so we really saw a need for kids that didn't have Wi-Fi at home, didn't have the English as a first language at home, and struggling with being able to work and learn remotely. So we transformed our community centers into remote learning camps, really focused and worked with the family advocates to make sure we had the highest need students in our programs. It was free, and we can very happily say we had no transmissions. So Richmond Highlands Recreation Center and Spartan Recreation Center, we were so safe. Everything was the janitorial staff, kids, everyone was great. And it was a learning experience. We transformed our gymnastics room into a 1st through 3rd grade classroom, and it was with fish. They all had their own little fish tanks as their classroom animals and stuff. It was great. We did extended summer school camp for highest needs kids, also working with the school district summer school in order to make sure that they were able to attend summer school because they had full day care. Again, free for the students, and that was funded not out of city dollars. We got that funding for them. We did virtual events, and we developed a lot of new partnerships. Legacy is hybrid programming. We're realizing, especially with specialized recreation, that it has opened the door for a lot more people to participate because they're medically fragile, physically unable at times to attend, and they can still be socialized. The need for socialization, as we all know, after the isolation of the last couple of years is huge, especially for some of our more vulnerable populations, our youth and our specialized recreation participants. Mental health crisis with youth and teens is I worked in youth and teen development for 20 years prior to the position I'm in now. It is at the highest crisis point I've ever seen. It's really a tough time, and that is something we don't anticipate to change for the next 5 to 10 years. Labor market shifts, we're having a hard time finding any extra help staff, any staff that want to work more than 20 hours for hourly. Pay rates are escalating. It's really a challenge. And embedding our health and safety measures, we take pride in the fact that we had no transmissions, and we want to keep it that way. So that is something that we continue to work on, and making sure that we're checking in with each other, our participants, and our other divisions and departments in the city to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can to keep our members as healthy and safe as possible, and our participants. Emergent needs, really the supervisory structure and growth and demand for programs. The programs, as I mentioned, we have so many with wait lists, adult trips, community gardens. We have so many walk leaders that want to do walks, all our youth sports programs, youth athletics, our preschool programs, our youth dance programs. We have wait lists, and we have the same supervisory structure we've had for many decades. And at this point, we just can't offer anything more. So we try and modify and adjust within what we are able to do and meet the demand as best we can. 6th graders being in middle schools has changed. We didn't typically, the YMCA, we work very closely with the YMCA, and they usually do the after school programming for elementary schools. And we love working in partnership, and we do the secondary schools. Well, now with 6th graders in secondary schools, that has put a big demand on our youth and teen development program. And the need for some extra supports there for sure. And I will pass off to Bethany.
Thank you, Mary. And just keeping in mind the time, I think we have a break coming up at 7, so I will try to go through this as expeditiously as possible. Again, my name is Bethany Walbrook-Dunn, and I am the city's Community Services Manager, and I'll be sharing some information about our programming and community services. I would say Mary is my partner on the recreation side. We kind of have recreation and then community services on the other side. So within community services, we have 5 distinct program areas. They're listed on the slide, and I'll go through each of them. They're emergency management, housing and human services, equity and social justice, environmental services, and then neighborhoods. So within emergency management, obviously this is a very large role that we play. Our main role within CSD is making sure that we have all the planning in place, whether that be the official documentation, the staff training, any other planning that needs to take place in order to respond to emergencies as they occur. I believe that Colleen mentioned earlier, there is a comprehensive emergency management plan that the city is required to have in place in order to be eligible for some various federal funding, including if there's a huge emergency and FEMA comes in with public assistance. So we keep that in place, and when situations happen, we're able to respond and get funding back from the federal government when their emergencies occur and there's a nationally declared emergency, like there was with COVID. Another couple ways that we work in the community is we do work with volunteers. We have both a ham radio group called ACS, and we also have a group of trained folks, our Community Emergency Response Team, or also known as CERT. That's been a little bit of a struggle, as you can imagine, the last couple of years, as it's been a challenge to have people gather. But we have a new emergency manager on board, and we're looking forward to re-engaging in those ways. Some ways that we have been implementing things over the last couple of years, and I'll talk about our COVID response related to emergency management a little bit later, but I'm sure we all recall we had a couple of very hot periods this summer, one in August and one in June into July. For the very first time, we opened a cooling center in partnership with a local church, and the second time we opened it, we used City Hall. So our emergency manager activated some of our CERT team and pulled that together to give folks somewhere to go in the middle of the day when it was 115 degrees. Okay. Next area is housing and human services. So kind of 3 main areas within this functional area. We do provide funding for local agencies to provide services to Shoreline residents. And what that looks like over a 2-year biennium, like our current 2-year biennium, it's about $880,000 of general fund that is available through a competitive funding process that we run every 2 years. And then there's about $306,000 in what I'm referring to as targeted funding. So it's restricted either grant funds or restricted state funding that can only be spent in very particular ways. So those are some of the same agencies, but again, those funding are reserved for certain purposes. There are 24 funded programs between 13 agencies that we currently are funding. A couple other things in this area, we are also tasked with implementing the city's affordable housing policies. And the main ways you'll see that reflected is through our multifamily tax exemption program, where developers would get basically a tax break. In turn, they are required to have a certain number of their units reserved for folks for affordable housing. We also have kind of a newish program within our station areas at 145th and 185th, where if you build a multifamily building within the MUR 35 or MUR 70, we have basically mandatory affordability with, I don't want to say no benefit to the developer, but it's just a requirement of building within that zone. So we have a staff person that works on those programs, works with our planning department to make sure that the land use covenants and the contracts are in place to ensure that what the council put forth in terms of these affordable housing policies are implemented correctly. And we also work with local agencies in service coordination. So whether that's working with the school district As Mary said, there's lots of ways that we work with them. A couple of examples would be we work with them on the Back to School Consortium program with backpacks and school supplies. We also work with them. They have a holiday program with the PTSA. And a couple other ways you may see or heard notice, we do have in Shoreline a severe weather shelter. So when it's either really cold, predicted to be really cold, or it's predicted to snow, we partner with a local nonprofit and a church to use that space, volunteer coordination, the whole thing. But this last season, which runs from November to March, we were open 12 nights with about average of 7 people a night. So it just gives you an idea of that folks are hopefully warm and inside versus out in the cold. So next program area is equity and social justice. And so in November of 2000, the City Council approved a resolution basically declaring Shoreline an anti-racist community. So this program's been in place many years prior to that, but that's just a reaffirmation of the work that's being done through equity and social justice. So there's some internal things that take place, whether that be staff training and resource committees. We've made some changes in how we hire. For example, names, when we're reviewing applications, names and addresses are no longer seen in the first round. We also know there's lots of unconscious biases that can take place by people's names. And so that's been one way that this program has affected change within the city. We also provide a lot of programming through community trainings, and then lots of community collaboration with groups and events. I know hopefully you've seen the beautiful Juneteenth artwork that's on the side of the storage facility on on Midvale. So that's a site where it's a collaboration between work that Mary does with arts and with work that we do in social equity and social justice. And so it's just a great example of how we partner through our divisions. The next area is environmental services. So one way that we're all affected by this is we do manage the city's solid waste contract with Recology. So there are several things that are involved in that. There's some regional coordination with hauling, and then there's just also the contract. And if there's any issues with the contract, we will often respond to any customer service issues that that residents have with that service. Another thing that we're doing right now that's really big and will affect things going forward is we are updating our climate action plan. And if you Google Shoreline Climate Action Plan, you can get involved in numerous ways there. And that may affect some budget things that we have going forward as we respond to climate change. They also do a wide variety of workshops. There's mini grant programs, educational materials, and working with schools and businesses. One way we're using some grant funds is we're encouraging local restaurants to use compostable materials. So we're basically providing a grant for them to have that service added to their Recology contract, and basically connecting them with ways to purchase compostable materials. So that's something that we rolled out in the last year that's been pretty impactful. Neighborhoods is the next area. And the main ways that we affect in neighborhoods is we support citizen participation through the 14 different neighborhood groups. There is a lot of coordination and guidance and support provided for community events. There is the Citywise project, which is going on right now, which is sort of a citizens academy where folks can nominate themselves, apply for this, and then go through weeks of information about how the city runs. So it's kind of similar to this, but less financially based, but just is there to give folks ways to get involved in the city of Shoreline. We have found that lots of folks that go through that, maybe some here, we've ended up having them on parks boards or running for council in other ways. So if you're interested in that, that'd be something, or getting involved in the city, that's another way to do so. And again, we do have some neighborhood mini grants, whether that be signage, benches, and there's lots of different ways that the neighborhoods are affected by the mini grant program. So in terms of response to COVID, right away in early pandemic, 2 years ago, the city council did approve emergency funding for agencies in April 2020. So that was something that did very rapidly, very quickly before we really knew what we were getting into. We've also been intimately involved in the distribution of federal response funding for housing. There's several ways that funding has come down from the federal government, but we've been instrumental in implementing those, getting that assistance out to our local agencies to fund, like I said, things like rent assistance. And there's also funding, I'm sure folks have heard of the CARES Act and now ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And we have been in discussions with council on the best way to use that funding. We also did a lot of programming related to food security. So we did a couple things. We worked with some local nonprofits who did meals in the parks. We worked with the school district to help them get their student meal programs out and going. And we also did grocery vouchering. And there's just, and that was made available to folks in partnership with the school district and some other local agencies who made us aware of folks that needed a little bit more assistance. And so we used funding in that way as well. And we also did a handful of mass distribution events back when masks weren't as easy to find. We did some drive-through events with our emergency management volunteers. So as others have shared, here's a slide that refers to the emerging needs related to community services. One big one that we are looking for in the future is to really pull together a human services strategic plan. We've had some plans in the past, but we've never really done a wide-ranging plan. And we're looking for ways to respond to the community needs and to make sure that we're focusing our funding and programming in ways that can basically best affect the community. We're also really challenged, as Mary said, in some of the organizational structure in just staff capacity to manage the increasing amount of contracts that we have. And I would also say the increasing amount of complexity of those contracts. And you can see it as the top city service that should receive the most emphasis is we are looking at ways to work in the realm of those in our community that are unhoused. I'm sure folks have heard of the Oak Shelter that opened almost exactly a year ago. And through that, we do have a 60-room facility. It's been full since the beginning. There's a wait list. We also contract for not a whole staff member, but part of a staff member's time that works at the Oaks to do actual homelessness outreach in the community. So that's on the street, checking out known locations, and then also responding if there is a report of someone camped in a park or in the right of way. So there are other ways that we're dealing with it now, but we just see it as an area that we really need to increase our focus on and coordination around. And that is the end of my presentation. I'll hand it back to, I think there was maybe a question. I'll see if I.
There was one question. There was a question way back in the chat from Linda that was just saying, if Shoreline was able to get to the, say, 10 per 1,000 acres and meet NRPA standards, does that confer other benefits related to eligibility for grant funding or other things?
So I'll jump in here because I wrote grants for the city for years, and there really is not a financial like a funding mechanism benefit to having more park land. There's tons of other benefits that we could probably, Kirk could probably name, but in terms of funding, that's not a criteria that I've seen.
Kirk, do you want to speak to the other benefits?
Yeah,
around meeting those standards?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And meeting those standards is part of the CAPRA accreditation, as Mary was discussing, but it is one of the city council's goals to have people healthy communities. And one of those is access to nature, public lands, and walking trails and things to expose people to nature. So that's part of the program and one of the larger benefits, one of the larger council goals we've been striving for. So we do try to add parkland, we do try to add trails, and have as much exposure as people can have to public land, parks, and nature where possible. So it's really a health benefit issue, and I could talk for ages about just how important it is to have exposure for children, elderly, and all of us in general. But being in nature, parks, and as well as building community, it's just it's kind of one of those key infrastructural pieces of a good, healthy community.
There is some empirical evidence. Florida's done a lot of research on this, on medical costs going down with the more you have park space accessible within walking distance of somebody's house. So there is a correlation there. And this is a big movement within National Recreation Parks Association right now to get more empirical data on that. We all know it, kind of just that this is the right thing to do. And we know that there's a connection, but there is a big movement with NRPA to get more data to share to answer questions just like that.
Thank
And I
you.
think, Mary, as you noted, sometimes it's just sort of obvious that as we think about more density coming in, particularly in the light rail areas, and recognizing the need for open space around for people who aren't going to have their own backyards, that recognizing that really becomes even more critical in keeping a community that people want to hang out in.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions for the parks? Very comprehensive presentation. Thank you all so much for that. I'll do a final call for questions. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then I think our Public Works team is here for the next presentation. All right, well, thanks, Parks team. Excellent presentation. Really appreciate you spending a sunny and warm evening with us tonight. Thanks again. Okay, so
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
It looks like it's about 7:03 here on my computer clock, which I always assume to be correct. So let's just take about a 5-minute break, just a short one to do stretch, whatever, and then we'll get right started with Public Works. So turn your camera when you're back. All right, we're gathering back here. Got about another minute, and then we'll turn it over to the Public Works team. All right, well, great. We have, I think, Randy, Lance, and Trisha with us here from Public Works, and I will let them introduce themselves as they get started. Who am I turning to first?
I think Randy will lead us off.
All right, excellent. Just give Randy a minute to join back on.
Christina, do you have the slide deck or do we need to pull the slide deck up?
Do you all have it?
I can have it.
I can go search.
Nope, then let me get it for you.
All right, Randy, I'm going to turn it to you to introduce your team and get us started. Welcome.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you all for staying here on the nicest day we've had this year. I'm Randy Witt. I'm the Director of Public Works. And so Public Works, we kind of like to say it's all the stuff you take for granted, right? You know, the roads should work, the sewer should work, the storm drainage should work, the bridges, et cetera, out there. But there's a lot of effort and actually a lot of money that goes into that there. So while we're waiting for the slide deck, okay, there we go. Christina, do you have to drive this or can it go over to one of us?
Give me a moment and I'll try and see if I can give you control.
So while we're
All right, Randy, you
Okay.
should be able to control it now.
I should do that. Okay, there we go. Giving away our secrets early. Okay, so let me introduce to you. Tonight we have Trisha Yunke, who's the city engineer. You heard her asking about slide decks at the beginning of this. And then also Lance Newkirk, who's our operations manager. Utility, both for the utility and the streets operation. And for some reason I am not advancing. There we go. Okay, here we go. All right. Thank you for the pause. So we'll walk through Public Works. We can have also a third main branch, which is traffic and transportation. So it's engineering, operations, and traffic. We'll talk about those three tonight and then a few things at the end. We're gonna do a little bit of handing off for it. So briefly, and I'm not gonna go through this, but Public Works underneath the city's umbrella has a mission and vision statement of our own. And then, as I mentioned, we're broken into utilities and operations. Again, those are the things you see on the ground, like surface water, wastewater, the roadway maintenance, as well as the grounds maintenance. So grounds maintenance, and Lance will get into this, is both parks as well as the stuff along the right of way. We have transportation. A lot of that's around planning and coordinating with other entities, as well as getting grants for projects. And then engineering as a handful of activities are related to building and stuff, both our own, which are the capital projects, as well as development projects, managing our right of way and so forth. So that's kind of the high level overview of Public Works. I'm waiting for this to go because I think I hand this off. No, there we go. Hand it off to me. So in transportation, which is one of the visions, one of the things that's really important to us as the city is our transportation master plan. And if you've been following city council meetings, we have had both our transportation manager and the transportation planner coming to council several times to talk about this. This is the overlying document for how we see transportation occurring in the city. It also rolls into the comp plan. It becomes a section of the comp plan there, which is an effort that happens next year. So we're getting this done this year to roll into next year. But it's made up of the three areas that we talk about here: the needs, the plans, prioritizing, which may or may not get to the project level. It may be criteria and plans for prioritizing, and then funding strategies. And then this group also does corridor plans and feasibility studies. So for example, all the work that's going on 145th now started with a corridor plan. What do we think we want it to look like? And the transportation group does that. They look at it from a planning perspective, and then when we get to the doing perspective, it's handed off to engineering. In transportation, there's a lot of transit coordination that goes on. This too is going on right now. But the big lift will be in 2024 when the new light rail station opens. But we look at the local and fixed route service. That is, for us in King County, a lot of that is Metro Transit, but it's not entirely them. Community Transit comes down into our area, Sound Transit comes into our area, as well as light rail will be in our area in 2024. And the big thing that'll happen in 2024 that people may want to watch, and we are closely working on, is they will reroute a lot of bus service that currently heads down to Northgate now to catch the light rail or into Seattle, will be adjusted to go into the Shoreline stations. So you'll see that happening when they open that. A lot of planning that goes on through the regional councils, government, and a lot of outcome of the transportation master plan is the transportation improvement plan. So you think of a pyramid of things, starting with the broad view of transportation as the master plan. Projects come out into this document, the transportation improvement plan. This document becomes the basis for priority work. It's a 6-year look, and then also has unfunded years or activities going out further. It talks about how do we fund it? How are we going to do it? This feeds directly into the capital improvement plan, which is then the actual funding document to do it. So it's an important part of the transportation work. With this, I'll hand it off to Lance to speak about utilities and operations. And Lance, you'll have to say next for me. I don't think I can hand this off to you very easily.
All right, will do, Randy. And thank you for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. Pleasure to speak with you. Two quick items I'd like to add to what Randy's served as an introduction is similar to the CAPRA certification that you heard for the Parks Department and that division. Public Works is also a nationally accredited agency through the American Public Works Association. And we were first accredited in 2017, and we just recently came through a reaccreditation in 2021. So that's a very big achievement for the department. They are limited number of agencies within the state of Washington that have achieved this certification. So we're very proud of that. Additionally, we are also a Salmon Safe certified agency, which is the first one in the state of Washington, the first municipality. And it does touch on many facets of our operations, from our development regulations all the way down to how we control our snow and ice control operations in the streets department. I will just touch briefly on this slide that the surface water utility and the wastewater utility, while they're not directly tied into the levy lid lift and the general fund conversations, they are a component of this division. And I will touch on with how that surface water and streets, there is a little bit of an interplay between the general fund activities from the streets department and the surface water utility. Next slide, Randy.
Waiting.
Well, I can provide introductory as while it's ready to load up. This slide will talk a little bit about the streets operations. And we're a fairly small work section within the streets, but we have a big area of responsibility that we take care of. And we have snow and ice control operations, which you heard me talk about briefly. And one of the things that we're excited about coming online here in the future is a new facility to help us provide these crucial operations for the city. It is also important to note that we're responsible for approximately 170 miles of street where we take care of sidewalks. And while not the larger capital projects in this division, it's more the smaller spot repairs and panel replacements for sidewalks. We also take care of traffic signage. And this is certainly something that is driven by regulations. Without going too far into acronyms, is we're governed by the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And so our staff have to adhere to sign installations, pavement markings, symbols like the bike lane symbols, the turn lane symbols. All of these, when they're applied on the asphalt, there is something that we have to adhere to these national standards. We also do an awful lot of pothole repairs. I think going back to the recent snow event that we had this past holiday over the Christmas and New Year's holiday, the month afterwards, we had over almost 700 potholes that we had to repair as an aftermath of that event, where the freeze and thaw really does its damage on the asphalt. So with the engineering side, I'll let Tricia talk about how that impacts on the capital improvement programs. But certainly we're aware that these type of conditions really impact the condition of the roadway and the experience of citizens within Shoreline. Additionally, we provide street sweeping services. And then, of course, there's debris and graffiti removal, which was interesting over this last pandemic period, that we actually saw an uptick in graffiti and debris that was left illegally in the public rights of way. And we're tracking about the same thus far in 2022 with the type of events we saw in 2021. Additionally, this work, we have a grounds maintenance section. This is a new group that was created after the last levy lid lift from 2016. This new group came to be with council approval in 2019. And it came about as a result of the desire to have better control of the type of services provided in the public right-of-way for the landscapes beds that you would see within Aurora Avenue and some of the other areas, which are depicted by the lower left-hand side of your screen. Those red areas are public right-of-way areas that are maintained by this work group. Additionally, if you can go back, Randy, the Parks group didn't come online until 2020. So prior to the city bringing these services in-house, they were performed by contractors. And one of the difficulties we experienced was often the contractors would underbid their services, and then we would have to rebid. And it was really a disruption of services and hard to maintain a consistent level of service. So we're very happy to have this service in-house where we can have better control of the consistency of services, and then also make some improvements where we hadn't been able to under the contracted services. Like I said, within 2020, we extended these services to the city's parks. And while the Parks Department has their maintenance responsibilities for, the structures and some of the open spaces and the trail maintenance and things like this, this group within Public Works takes care of the improved landscape areas where there's lawn maintenance and also some of the beautification beds. And a good example of one of these areas that we maintain is the Interurban Trail. And then, of course, parks that you would be familiar with, whether it's Hamlin, Hilltop, or Paramount, or one of the other parks. And then wrapping it up, we also provide services through this group for the city facilities like City Hall and Richmond Highlands Rec Center and Spartan Rec Center as well. It's interesting to note, and I think Randy will touch on this later in the presentation, as that as an asset-driven group with Public Works maintaining the public's assets, we fine through the development that's going on in the city, we have to be mindful of what that does to the impact for our maintenance services. So this particular group recently, because of the Westminster 150th Avenue improvement projects, where there's the multi-family or housing, and which I think is called the Current right there at the corner, added a whole bunch of new landscaping features that now the city has to maintain. And as a result, we have added an additional staff member to help maintain those assets that have now come online. I'll stop there with my presentation, but do keep that thought in mind. And I think Randy and maybe Trish will touch on that in their presentation. So do we want to hold questions till the end, or do we want to tackle them now? I saw one question come through.
Yeah, sorry, I realized that I explained to Parks that what we have been doing in the past is people have put their questions in and other team members have been able to answer them as we go. But let's just pause because there is one there that says, does the city have a vac truck for cleaning catch basins?
We do have a Vector truck, but it's for the enterprise services. We are currently utilizing the replacement Vector truck that has not been surplus from the city as of yet to support some of the catch basin cleanings and some of the things on the street operations. That is something, though, going forward, we would certainly like to add as we evaluate, again, the benefit of contracted services versus in-house services. So that'll be one of those future conversations that we look to hold.
And there's a question just based on your last comment about why the city needs to maintain private landscaping at apartment buildings.
Well, great question. And it's not that we're maintaining the private landscaping, it's the landscaping that is within the defined public right-of-way. So those areas that were already existing, that the development was required through the development regulations to install, those are amenities and assets that we are now maintaining.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, these are, just to add on to Lance's, these are the street trees and the planter strips that are typically between the sidewalk and the street.
Great, thanks. All right, well, let's keep rolling and I'll keep an eye on the chat. And if others have questions, please feel free to enter them in there.
Well, I'll take my turn here to talk a little bit about engineering and the services we provide through engineering. The first group we have here is, or big responsibility we have, is capital project delivery. And you can see through some of the pictures here on the slide that we do a wide variety of projects, both big projects and small projects. And these include everything from small surface water drainage projects to large pavement overlays, to sidewalks, and pump stations and other types of facilities. Mainly through contracting out, this group, we manage designers largely, and we do the design and we contract out, put them out to bid, have contractors that do the work, and we oversee and manage the construction of those projects as well. A lot of these projects are funded through other revenue other than the general fund. We do have some other sources of revenue, including the surface water utility for surface water type projects or wastewater utility. But there are times that our needs and our desires for capital projects often exceed what our other funding sources are. And so on a project by project specific basis, we often do use some general fund contributions in order to get projects fully funded and make them a reality. Or sometimes just to get them started. Sometimes we can do a good job through some sort of feasibility study or an initial planning study. And then with that, we can take that and move forward with design. We also use that information to go after grants. And the grants are a big way that we fund, particularly our transportation projects, but also other projects as well. And I think one of the things critical about managing these grants is that a lot of grants require a match. There are a few grants that are 100%, but a lot of them require match, anywhere from 0 to 50% on some of the parks projects. So to do a significant project, that's a lot of match. And we have in the past really relied on some general fund contributions in order to meet that match requirement in order to get a larger project done. So within this group, we also, you heard Randy mention the transportation master plan and the transportation improvement plan. The next layer of that is the capital improvement plan. That's kind of the top of the pyramid, where we actually define the projects that and how they're funded. That's where the projects really become real. And so that falls into this group as well. And along with those grants comes a lot of requirements on how we administer those grants and administer federal funds on there as well. So Randy, if you want to switch to the next slide. I believe it's traffic operations. This group is largely funded with, primarily funded with general funds and supported through these levies. And this is where we see a lot of our traffic, all of our traffic signals and our school zone flashers and speed zone flashers all operate out of our traffic operations group. They contract a lot of this work, maintenance work with King County because we do not have our own signal crew or the capacity to do that right now. They do work in conjunction with some of what Lance talked about previously with regards to traffic signs, pavement markings. Our traffic operations team sets a lot of those guidelines or makes sure things are designed properly before they get put down either by a King County contract or by our operations crew. They work with street lighting, and then they support the capital projects and also development review projects. So as new projects are coming in for development, our traffic team is looking at what they're doing, what's the impact on the roadway network as far as traffic, and what signs need to go in where, what striping needs to go in where. All of that runs through this traffic operations team. I also have on here the parking management, and this is kind of becoming a new area, and we anticipate this to grow as we see the redevelopment occur and as we see light rail go online. Right now, we don't have a lot of managed parking areas within the city, but we do expect that to grow as we see this redevelopment and the light rail take place. And with that, I will move on to the next slide. And then the other piece of this group is development review, working in conjunction with traffic. Again, they review the development applications that come in, and these can be large and small. These could be somebody wanting to install a new driveway to their property or a new large apartment complex. All of those come through a development review or a permit process with really a lot of focus on what is being done in the right of way, and is it meeting our standards and our requirements for what gets built, both from is it the right width of sidewalk that we want? Is it in the right location? But then we also do inspect this work to make sure it is built properly and that it's built for the long term, so that we reduce our long-term maintenance on the asset. This group also is doing a lot of inspection work on Sound Transit as that is coming on board. And then the last thing within this group is this is where we also do a lot of our development and maintenance of codes and our engineering development manual and coordinating those standards with other groups within the city, such as traffic, operations, to make sure we have a set of standards that meets the city's long-term needs. And with that, I think I'm turning it back to Lance.
I think
Unless I think there are a couple
has-
questions. So I can answer a couple of these questions. How many grant writers does the city have? We do not have a dedicated grant writer. You heard from Bethany earlier, and as I joined in at the very end, she used to do a lot of grant writing. In her new role with community services, we've distributed that load out more to the Public Works Department. And within our transportation services group, they provide a lot of the grant writing support. That is not a dedicated position for anybody.
Okay.
Those are the two questions.
Oh, what was the other one?
Nope, that was basically the same thing.
Okay. No way. Thought it'd be worth mentioning asset management a little bit. Both Lance and Trish talked about it. The city has a lot of assets. The highest number, signs wins that contest. Most volume, the underground drainage and sewer utilities win that contest. But as you can imagine, it goes down even to plantings in the right of way, length of sidewalk, those sort of things. And so we do a lot of work in transitioning assets from plans and projects into our asset management system. And then within the asset management system, we also manage how we monitor and repair the assets when we do inspections, and we put their conditions in them there. So the four things on the slide here that we wanted to hit on. First one's called See, Click, Fix. If you don't have this app on your phone, we suggest you get it. It's a pretty slick app that, if you see a pothole or a down sign, graffiti, you can report it to the city. We get it. We then put it into our work order system to evaluate and address it out there. So what's our work order system? That's the next one. It's called City Works. It's the hub that has all the assets grouped together and then tracks what we hear about them, when we do work on them, when we do inspections for condition assessments, when people complain about them. Integral to City Works working at all really is our GIS system, the graphical information system. So you guys have perhaps seen this a little bit, that if you go into the city's website, you can look at our inventory of assets and look at it. The GIS is what tells you where that asset is, where the manhole is, where the sidewalk is, where the sign is, those sort of things. And it's that data point that's the asset that we're able to say, okay, this thing's broken, and fix it. And then we use a lot of mobile devices. That's getting more popular as we go on for monitoring our work. Kind of the big one that we use a lot is we can move into City Works into tablets and phones now and track our work, respond to people, those sort of things. This area is where there is a lot of work done, a lot of money spent, a lot of time spent to make this work both internally for the city and externally to the community. This is about as good a picture as I could put in here. But if you clicked into this city's asset sheets, if you went into Shoreline, Public Works, and said, hey, I want to see your storm drainage system, this would be what you would see out here. These are storm drain lines. I think there's a sewer line in here. This is City Hall. So we have assets around all of the trees and stuff in City Hall. It goes on. This is just how we track things. Signals are picked up here. The conduits that connect the signals are picked up here. It's an integral part to how we know what we have, how we track what we have, how we watch its conditions and do work around it. So we want to talk a little bit about emerging issues. I think you guys have seen this from some of your other material, and some of this overlaps with what I think other departments are talking about. Sarah probably shared that information technology is a big deal to the city across the board, but they're in public works centric world. There's support for our enterprise applications. As I mentioned, we use City Works a lot. We use another system called Track It for the permit work. We in planning share that area. And those things are evolving, changing, really useful. We need to use them more and better. As I mentioned, the GIS system underlies all the data. We need to get the data in there. And then out of all this becomes records management, which is both records for the asset as well as just records for the day-to-day business that we do in getting those systems up. There's a lot of energy and money, especially now in this high development time, that goes to development support. Development carries a lot of that cost, but as Trish mentioned, in other areas of our work, there is a general fund aspect to that work. City maintenance facilities out there. Lance touched on it. He touched on the good news. We are building one of our small facilities this summer. It'll be out off of Ballinger Way. This goes back to, honestly, this is like 7 or 8 years ago. We looked at the city facilities and said, these are not adequate for the maintenance and the level of service the city needs to provide. And it's gone a couple different directions over time as we've looked at studies and how can we improve it. We have a plan now that involves upgrading the facilities out at the Ronald Maintenance Yard that's inside of part of Ronald Park area. The North City Maintenance Yard over off of 20th, north of Ballinger, the facility I just mentioned out of Ballinger, and we need to wrap in the new wastewater facility we picked up. But key to this conversation is we're not funded for all of them out there, and we desperately need to get the funding for this in place. General fund won't cover it all, but there's a role in this for general fund to cover it. The odd thing about this is these kind of projects do not get grants. It just doesn't happen. As Trish mentioned, capital projects and the grant match comes from general fund, or part of it comes from general fund. And then as Lance mentioned, as we're bringing on more assets, we have more things to maintain. At the same time, what we have is getting older and perhaps cracking more. And a good example of that, which we're going to fix in a little bit, for those who go down 155th, will notice the pavement is kind of going to heck. Good news is we're going to overlay that street this year, but maintaining those streets as they start to get older and start to show their wear and tear more is becoming an increasing cost. So we see that both on new things coming on board as well as older things kind of getting to the end of their life. And again, we use a variety of tools for that. The motor vehicle excise tax, or excuse me, we got rid of the motor vehicle excise tax. Now the voted transportation district helps fund our overlays and our sidewalk repairs. Fuel tax does that also, but again, it doesn't cover it all. So there's a tension into the general fund for that. So these are the areas that we look at that are relevant to this group's assignment. And I think that is our last slide, and we're almost on schedule, but we'd like to see if you guys have any other questions.
Randy, there was a question in the chat that I think you partially answered, but I want to make sure, which is around with the increased pace of development and then the increasing number of permit applications. Are you anticipating needing more staff? I think I heard you say some of that would get picked up by the fees, but there'd still be a general fund need. But what's your sense of staffing needs?
Yeah, well, if you ask me, we always need more staff because we're not hard. I have trouble keeping up with what we're supposed to do. But the reality is, that's a good question. We're starting to see that with the uptick of development. If we look forward to going out, it might not be the development in front of the place, but just for example, if we build a number of these larger projects, there's going to be more cars and there'll be more wear and tear on the roads and other things. So Lance mentioned where we, in one particular area, we got a lot of wants, but we do track how things are added onto. Are we getting more areas we need to maintain with the grounds maintenance? Are we getting more signs? Signs are a big one that take maintenance, usually from the get-go on down the lines. And it's not an every year thing where we say, okay, I need another staff member. But you look at it over time and we can go, okay, over these last few years, we've seen this kind of change in the inventory. We think we need another person. We're seeing the backlog grow, that kind of conversation.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for the Public Works team? Thanks very much for the presentation.
No, you're welcome. Just remember, we're the best department. You should send all the recommendations our way.
Noted. All right. Well, thanks to the Public Works team again. Really appreciate it. So we are almost wrapped up with our service presentations. We're pretty tight on time, but I know that some of Sarah's presentation, she was thinking we can also cover at our next meeting, because we really will, I promise, move to the discussion phase of this project starting at our next meeting, but we do need to just wrap up what are the other administrative services that are covered.
Okay, well, thank you guys. We'll disappear.
Yeah.
If you think of other questions, let Christina know and she'll get them to us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Have a good evening.
Paul. Yeah. All right, Sarah.
Great. Well, I am going to see if I can make the magic of technology work and share my screen.
It's working.
Excellent. Okay. Well, and now I've got to get back to I have so many things open. I want to get back to my notes page, but you know what? I'll be okay with my notes page. So I will for sure make it through support services, and I may choose to just pause there. You've seen sort of the revenue review, or I might go into revenue review and stop after that and not get into the next conversation. Because as I said, I was laying the table for our big conversations next time, but let's go with support services. So, there we go. So when we talk about support services, we are talking about city attorney, human resources, finance, information technology, fleet, and facilities. So these are services that are utilized by all of the departments in order to deliver all the services you've been hearing about for the last few weeks. So I'm going to quickly cover those and try and give you a sense of what they are. First, it's important to know that we really operate under the exact same strategic planning cycle. And in fact, I like to think about us as being the grease that keeps the cogs moving. So without these support services, none of the departments would be able to do what they do. Or we would have silos where, every department would need to have its own human resources and such, and that's not very efficient. So we try to make sure we keep things moving. So when we look at this city attorney, they are a small but mighty team, and they provide services around supporting us on all legal issues that might come up in the city. They also manage the prosecutor and outside legal counsel. So if there is, a legal question that comes up, they answer it, and it's impressive. We have the city attorney, we have a assistant city attorney, and one paralegal. And then again, they do use contract services for our prosecutor and depend upon expert counsel for specific areas, but they are impressive. Human resources, again, another small but mighty team, a team of 3, again, an HR director, an senior HR analyst, and an HR assistant. And they manage recruitment, selection, compensation benefits, employee relations. We do have one bargaining unit. They manage that. Development, training, performance management, all of the things an HR department does, and they do that for the whole city. And I think all of you have heard about the great, well, there's lots of words, great resignation, the great rethinking, but we have had a lot of change and turnover at the city. We just were, as a leadership team, contemplating that 50% of our staff are new to their position. So they either had a promotion or they are new altogether to the organization. And these 3 people have made that all happen. And that's just in the last 2 years. So again, small and mighty. Then there's Administrative Services Department. This is my department. We're not so small. We have about 40 people, but we cover a lot of functions in that. So you heard about Parks earlier. So Parks joined our administrative services team along with Fleet and Facilities. So they offer the fleet and facilities manage the fleet for all of the functions that you've heard. Facilities manage all of the facilities that support city's function, including all the facilities that are in our parks. And so that was where the merging of those functions made sense. we have information technology, which you just heard Randy talking about, that supports all aspects from telephones, network support, application support, our geographic information system, help desk supporting all of the laptops and computers that every employee uses. And so information technology being broad, and then all things financial, accounting, payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, budgeting, and tax and license. So bringing the revenues in. So that is, and then grants management, which one of the questions earlier was, do we have a dedicated grant writer? And we don't. Bethany used to serve a coordination role for us that was sort of grant compliance, as well as sort of coordinating all of the departments in applying. When Bethany moved on, we did decentralize that. And we've been focusing then the position, although it's vacant at the moment, on grant compliance, which is actually quite a challenge, is just helping the departments once they get a grant. How do we make sure that we're meeting all the rules that go with that grant? Because there is no such thing as free money. I can tell you that. So we do have emerging issues. I think we talked about it. You saw it in the papers you heard today, but in administrative services and in HR and legal, we see that the support capacity is significantly been impacted just at current needs for the most part, with the exception the city attorney is sort of looking out in the future, and they think that they could continue with their contracted level of service for a couple more years, but they're anticipating needing to add an assistant city attorney in 2025, and then another half a paralegal in 2026. But the other needs are really immediate. I mean, the reality is we could use these today, but we don't have them in the budget or approval for them, but recognizing that we have these needs. And I'd say on the IT staff, we are currently doing a very detailed analysis to see, we don't know if that 4.75 FTE number is right, but it's what we believe we'll probably see. It could actually be worse than that. So we've hired a consultant to help us analyze the needs in that area. Part of it is impacted because of the fact that there has been a lot of turnover, and this has impacted not just these support services, but throughout the city. It's hard to know how much of the workload challenges, because you're dealing with 50% of your staff who are brand new, and how much is a long-term systemic issue. So we're trying to evaluate what's the difference. What do we just need to get us through while we get people familiar with their work, and what is the long-term need? Because we know we were lean and probably a little too lean even before heading into the pandemic. So before we just have a few minutes, so I'd be happy to take any questions.
There are two questions in the chat. One was whether the city's hoping to bring in any particular functions in-house that you're currently contracting. That's the first one.
We are always looking, and I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so I can see faces. So we are always evaluating what makes sense to bring in-house versus outsourcing, or is there something that might make more sense to outsource it? And I would say at the moment there is nothing that is a clear option for outsourcing. Randy talked about when we brought grounds maintenance, or actually Lance talked about bringing grounds maintenance in. We had been looking at that for several years, and it never actually made financial sense, even though it made operational sense, because we were having so much problem contracting. What happened was a sea change in that the legislature changed our prevailing wage rules, and that made outsourcing very unaffordable. And so it at that point made sense. Okay, now it makes sense to bring it in-house. But we are constantly looking to say, from both a level of service as well as a cost perspective, what might make sense. So something we're looking at, but I can't say I've got anything about ready to tip the scales.
Great. Next up was is the city going to be transitioning to electric vehicles on the fleet side?
That is definitely on our plan. We are purchasing our first all-electric truck hopefully it'll show up this year. We'll see what supply chain, but we have placed the order. And so we're in line for one of the new Ford light duty. And as there are more vehicles that meet our operational needs that are electric and we are in replacement mode, we'll do that. So to help us be prepared for that, we do have replacement reserves for our vehicles, and we take great care of them. And we've always done our best to determine when's the right time to replace a vehicle. Just because it's 6 years old or 7 years old doesn't mean you have to replace it. So we look at when is the maintenance, starting to outweigh the benefit of holding on to it. And for any vehicles where we're anticipating that there is an electric vehicle in the pipeline, we'll push that envelope even a little further to wait and try and wait for those electric vehicles so that we'll be ready. And in the meantime, we can continue to reserve for that new electric vehicle, which might be cost a little more than replacing it with another gas vehicle. But currently we do have, I think we have one or two Leafs, and I wish Kirk was here because he could tell me that. And we also have the Priuses, which we've had for many years. So we're trying to get there. It will not be as quickly as any of us would like.
Great. And
we're on our way.
Is the school district a partner with youth programs or after school sports?
The school district, I think that, like Mary said, we partner with them primarily sort of splitting the after school programs so that they take the primary school programs and the school, actually that isn't the school district, excuse me. The school district, that was a YMCA. So the school district, we work with them on the after school programs for the teens. As she mentioned, there's the hang time, and the school district does partner with us on those, but not specific sport programs. Those are, school district has their programs and then the city has our programs. Oh, I think we have a good relationship with them.
And then the last question that's in the chat for now is, given, ransomware attacks, do you see needs for further investments in IT, sort of network security, or just trying to replace maybe current enterprise software?
That is definitely one of the drivers behind some of our IT needs. We have been ramping up. We actually contract out quite a bit of IT support in the network area. We've actually hired a firm that is helping us with monitoring our network and making sure that we have appropriate tools to recognize potential attacks should they happen. But that is primarily, we're looking at the hardware side. Our software is all fairly new. We replaced or upgraded most of our enterprise applications in the last 5 or 6 years, so we don't have anything that's terribly old, and we've been trying to keep up with the upgrades to those. But again, that's part of the challenge, is because that just takes a lot of time. And what our departments need us to do is also be able to expand on the use of those applications. And just keeping the wheels on the bus takes a lot of our effort at this time. So that is part of why we are looking to add staff into the IT, our IT function.
Great.
And the pool. So I think the question about the pool is, would we be taking something out to voters soon? And what is happening now is that we have received a grant from King County in partnership with Kenmore and Lake Forest Park, and maybe a couple other regional cities, to look at options for potentially having a regional pool. And once that feasibility study gets completed, I think we'll have a much better sense of what we would take to the voters, whether that might be metropolitan park district, or whether it would be a shoreline only. So we're pleased that King County saw fit to give us a grant in order to look at some other more creative options, rather than just taking back to voters what we'd already taken to them the first time.
Any other questions for, it's largely been Sarah, you're really in the hot seat right now.
Yeah, happy to answer anything else. Or if not, Christina and I can find the answer from somebody.
Mhm. Great. Well, it's been yet again a very full evening with a lot of presentation, and appreciate everyone sort of taking it in. The materials were sent in advance, so feel free to look at those again. This, as we mentioned, it is the end of the sort of what does the levy lid lift fund currently, and as you've seen, it's a lot. So you can see why when Sarah sort of says she's showing her hand to say, you know, she would support another levy lid lift, it's because that would be a significant drop in service to not have that. It's something that I just wanted to also kind of plant in people's minds is a comment, I think it was maybe from Mary in the Parks presentation. Labor costs are rising, and it is a difficult hiring environment, and that's not just in the city. Anybody who's trying to hire right now knows that, and I hear it across every sector I work with, and so I think that may have implications as well for some of the estimates and just sort of the environment that we're in. So as was mentioned, our next 3 meetings are really going to be around, okay, so what are the policy questions related to our charge around the levy lid lift? And there'll be more time really to engage in that and discuss that as a group. And I think you'll be able to kind of come off mute and we'll have more conversation and not just sort of facilitate via the chat. Sarah, anything else you want to mention about our upcoming meetings?
The only thing I'll say is do look at the council memo. Know that we are hoping to bring back to you some costing. We've been doing some costing around some of those emerging issues. And so we'll be able to show what that impact might be, right? What does that look like if we added some of these additional services or even base services to the model? And so we'll bring that back to show you and discuss that with you at the next meeting. So that will be coming.
And I think, Robin, I saw your question about might we be able to meet in person. My understanding, and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, is the council is still not set to meet until late in May, and they won't be bringing any commissions or committees back until that time. So I think we'll be done meeting by the time they come back. So we will be, our next 3 meetings will still be planned to be here out in the virtual world. I see, Christina, you're shaking your head. Yes, and not no, but yes. So I think that's right.
But we'll see if we can use some more creative engagement strategies, if we can get a poll in here or something, so that it can feel a little bit more participatory.
Yes. And there were 2, I had a question about just the council memo, because I believe there were 2 emails that came from Christina. And I was just trying to find the date. I don't know if Christina, you have the date that was sent out on that. I can also just hit forward once I find it. I will follow up and hit forward on that to the request on that. All right, well, we are at 8:01. Thanks again for your attention, your terrific questions as always, and much appreciated, and look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. And again, Christina is your contact if you have other questions. Mary Ellen, I'm at my desk. I will hit forward on the council memo when I get off. All right, good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.